Hello folks, Eddie Smith here from Midwestern Marks, back with another book review. Just finished this bad boy, the Bernie Sanders political biography. Got it from a family member for Christmas, and I was just going to read it for fun, give my brain a little break from reading theory. But actually, I felt like there was a lot that I learned from the book, just reading about Bernie's experience, organizing at the grassroots level, especially when he was in Vermont. Because the first time he ran, he got 6% of the vote, right? And then obviously he was able to win mayor of Vermont and then later become a congressman and then a senator and then eventually run for president. So how did he do this? How did he organize people at the grassroots level? Vermont, many people don't know this, prior to Bernie, was a Republican state. They had Republican... They voted Republican. It was just a Republican state. And then after Bernie, they started calling it the People's Republic of Vermont. And he basically turned it into a little commune. Not exactly, but, definitely one of the most left-leaning states in the country. Left-leaning just because he pitched to these people who thought they were Republicans that he was going to take care of the issues facing their everyday lives, what they call kitchen table economics. So he understood so well the material conditions of Vermont, right? He would... for years, for 30 years, he would talk to workers in Vermont every day, and they said he developed these generational relationships with the people of Vermont. And these people would say, I don't know if I'm a socialist, but I like Bernie, right? Because he's doing all these public works projects, and he's supporting the unions, and he's supporting healthcare, and he's making our lives easier and better. And this is just what Bernie pitched to them, right? And that's how he was able to win a Republican state as a Democratic Socialist. Just incredible organizing at the grassroots level. So what are people telling Bernie at the grassroots? One, they need unions. He was anti-right to work, very important. Two, he was huge against outsourcing, right? TPP, more importantly, NAFTA, because NAFTA was in the 90s, so that's what this book talks about more. Had tons of jobs outsourced. These free trade deals that allow corporations to outsource jobs and then ship them back to the U.S. for free, and then ship materials back to the U.S. for cheap because there's no longer trade tariffs to make sure that jobs are kept in America. And this is when we've seen massive deindustrialization and the outsourcing of so many manufacturing jobs to impoverished countries. And this is something people on the left just don't talk about, right? Including socialists. People who call themselves socialists do not talk about deindustrialization in the U.S. And I understand the concern with bringing back a ton of fossil fuel heavy industrial jobs, right? But it's not like those jobs are disappearing into thin air. They're being outsourced into a country in the global south where capitalists can exploit cheap labor, right? So fossil fuel is getting used anyways. We need to bring manufacturing here and start building sustainable jobs, right? Creating jobs in the renewable energy sector so we can transfer people from fossil fuels to renewables. But it seems like sometimes a lot of socialists in the U.S. are just calling for essentially eco-fascism. Like, let's just make everyone equally poor. Let's get rid of fossil fuels tomorrow. Biden was against banning fracking, and a lot of socialists came after him for that. Biden would have lost the election if he would have come out against fracking, because people's jobs are reliant on that, right? And yes, the climate crisis is a huge deal. Yes, we need to get rid of fracking. Yes, fracking's horrible for the environment. I love the environment. I'm a hippie. I love to go hiking and go to Colorado. I hate how fossil fuel companies are destroying the earth. But I hate worse, as a socialist, seeing working class people lose their jobs and be sent into poverty. So we have to offer them a solution. We need to nationalize the energy sector, bring manufacturing jobs back, and put people in renewable jobs that are better paying jobs, rather than just say, we're going to take your jobs because we need to get rid of fossil fuels now. It can't be that simple. That is not what working class Americans want to hear, and that is what Bernie Sanders understood, at least when he was running in Vermont. So 2016 was an interesting part of the book where they talk about Bernie's 2016 candidacy versus Trump, because it was kind of populist left versus populist right. Right? Bernie has all these plans for bringing people's jobs back, all these plans for strengthening unions, all these plans for giving people single-payer health care, right? Strengthening the working class, populist rhetoric, stuff that helps the workers. And Trump talked about bringing jobs back too, and he talked about ending corruption, and he talked about ending the wars, and then he was just anti-PC, right? He just said whatever he wanted. And a media study showed that network cable in 2015 gave Trump network news, gave Trump gave Trump 357 hours of free coverage compared to Bernie's 20. And there are tons of statistics listed like that, not by Bernie, but by Tom Nichols, who wrote the afterword of his book. The media, Trump was just driving up their ratings because he was such a media spectacle. So CNN and MSNBC, these people who then, after Trump won, went on to blame Bernie, for not dropping out soon enough, blame Bernie for Trump beating Hillary. They gave Trump hours and hours and hours of free airtime for him to say, I'm bringing your jobs back, I'm ending the wars. Whereas they pushed Bernie aside because what the cable media understood was that Trump didn't mean any of it. Right? Trump was just a con man. They didn't take him seriously. He got into office. He didn't do anything for workers. He didn't end any wars. He didn't do any of the stuff he talked about. He didn't repeal NAFTA or TPP. He wrote NAFTA 2.0. He just wrote a new trade deal that changed nothing, brought no new jobs back. But Bernie actually would have pushed for these things. How much he would have got implemented as president, we'll never know. But the media actually knew Bernie was serious, right? The media, the corporate media understands that Bernie's a serious person who wants to take their wealth and take more importantly, their power and redistribute it to the working class, which is why they were okay with blowing up Trump, right? The media and even the liberals, the Democrats, were more scared of Trump than they were of Bernie. Bernie he backed off some of those economic policies, right? I think he fell into being a progressive rather than a socialist, I'll say. And he stopped putting class first. He started talking a lot about the environment in a general way, right? Not saying specifically we need more jobs. He did a little bit with the Green New Deal. But even the Green New Deal, it's a lot of like we're going to tax the fossil fuel billionaires, right? There's a lot about taxes. I don't know that taxes sell that well in America because 40% of our taxes, people see half their paycheck go to taxes at the end of the month, and then it gets used on endless war and stuff. So people are kind of averse to taxes. I think he should have gone from a position of worker ownership and just hit on those basic issues over and over and over again, right? These issues of improving unions, getting rid of right to work, single payer healthcare. And he did. Bernie sticks with the same plan, but I think it could have been a little more focused in 2020, right? I think when he was in Vermont, I think he knew his constituency. He really knew the material conditions of Vermont. He knew how to run a campaign better than any of the corporate Republicans or corporate Democrats who were sent into Vermont with a handful of corporate cash to try and take Bernie out, which happened in every single election of his career, right? Because he understood the material conditions of Vermont after living there for so long. He understood what workers wanted to hear and what they wanted. And I think he leaned on his staffers a little bit too much in 2020. I was someone who worked on the campaign, and I saw certain things like they would tell me to censor my tweets that were apparently too mean towards the liberal establishment. And there were a lot of people in the campaign who had no concept of class or workers' issues, right? They were sort of college students, upper middle class. And they were great people, fighting for the right things. But they didn't talk about class at all. They didn't talk about unionization hardly at all. And even when we were knocking doors for Bernie, our door knocking infrastructure, the app that we would use that would send us door to door, it only has you knock on registered Democrats' houses, right? And as Bernie understands the material conditions of Vermont, I felt like me and my friends who were knocking on doors, who were from Iowa, not the staffers who were sent in. We love the staffers who were sent in. They were great people, but we understood the material conditions of our area better than they did, but they were kind of in charge. There was one situation where we were trying to organize one of the local colleges in our area, and we were told not to do that. I want to have some of the staffers on who worked with me so we can talk more in depth about this, but it was just less focused, right? And there's another thing, like every section of America sort of has its own culture, right? You have the South, the Midwest, East Coast, West Coast, and they all have their own sort of material conditions and their own culture. And that's really, really important to understand. I think there was a bit too much bureaucracy in the Bernie campaign, a bit too much top down rather than having the people who understand those areas really do all the organizing, or like union leaders from the area really take hold of the organizing. And a lot of that's because, a lot of the unions supported Biden because the unions are in pretty rough shape. And I recommend socialists go into the unions and try and strengthen them. That's really what we need in America right now. But yeah, I just think Bernie's campaign in 2020 became a little unfocused. And what he did in Vermont shows that when you just preach to people's needs, right? No matter race, creed, ethnicity, belief system, religion, whatever else. The working class has the same economic needs. And if you hit on those over and over and over and over again, people aren't just going to dismiss you just because you call yourself a socialist, right? As was proven in Vermont, when they see that Bernie was fighting for the stuff that they cared about, the stuff that was affecting their everyday lives as a worker, where they're exploited by a boss, they voted for him. They didn't care that he was a socialist. And in the Midwest, if you ask people why they're Republican, they'll tell you it's because the Democrats are so condescending and bad, right? It's not because they have this deep loyalty to the Republican Party. And that was kind of proven by Trump, right? Trump just kind of came in with this populist, anti-establishment, anti-corruption rhetoric, and he was able to run through the Republican establishment with that. And Bernie was less successful. But there was a tweet going around during the campaign that said, think of Bernie's policies with Trump's balls, right? If Bernie just said the stuff that Trump said, and not the racist stuff, of course. And Bernie would never. He marched with MLK. But if he had the gall to just tell it how it is, be like, no, Hillary's corrupt. Her husband signed NAFTA and outsourced all your jobs. Why would you vote for her? Vote for me. He didn't do that, because he's too nice of a guy. But yeah, so yeah, what's the legacy of Bernie? Because I've seen some people who I think are well-intentioned talk about Bernie like he's just an imperialist, he's a piece of garbage. No, I mean, this is a man he wasn't like, there's a lot of socialists now, democratic socialists, who were like progressives or social democrats, and then they saw Bernie and they said, oh, I'm a democratic socialist now, right? Bernie was a socialist from the beginning, and he decided to get into politics and kind of water down his socialist message, right? Not run in with a picture of Marx and Lenin and be like, workers, follow me, socialism, woo. He sort of watered down his message, but he was always a socialist, right? He always understood the theory of working class versus owning class. Yeah, so a lot of people just criticize him for being an imperialist because he voted for the war in Yugoslavia, and that's like my favorite guy, Parenti's big criticism of Bernie. That's my biggest criticism of Bernie. I can't believe he voted for that. But this is the guy who was railing against the Iraq War, railing against the war in Syria. One of the only congressmen who voted against the war in Iraq, gave a long speech about all the people who are going to die in this war. Basically predicting everything that would play out in Iraq, as the corporate establishment was telling us, Iraq's going to be a 2-week war. Literally, that's what they were saying, and Bernie was railing against this. So it rubs me the wrong way when you have like young socialists, and I know people are angry at the establishment, but they're like, screw you, Bernie, you stupid imperialist. Like, this dude for the last 40, 50 years has been fighting with everything in him from within liberal democracy to bring people to the left and move the conversation to the left, or not even to the left, to the working class, right? And that's what he's done in 2016 and 2020. He's made socialism so much more popular. Yeah, so to just bash him and act like his legacy is worthless is really kind of sad, given everything this guy's fought for and everything he's accomplished, right? Like, I got paid for the Bernie campaign to knock on people's doors and talk to them about socialism. That's a good thing, right? That is a good thing. And there was another tweet that said, the Bernie campaign was a bad thing. They taught people that socialism was Scandinavian countries, and they said Cuba, but Cuba's an authoritarian dictatorship, right? He wasn't defending Cuba. It's like, who cares, right? We can still implement socialism and worker ownership of industry without having every working class American know everything about the Cuban Revolution and Che Guevara, right? And what Bernie did, more so than teach people that Cuba's an authoritarian dictatorship. And by the way, he praised Fidel's literacy programs and talks about Fidel in the book. He also talks about Parenti in the book. But yeah, he was spreading socialist ideas all around America, and he's done so more than any socialist in probably the last 50 years. So it's really annoying to see people on Twitter just bashing him like he's useless or he's done nothing for the socialist movement. Right here, I'm a pro-Cuba communist, and I probably wouldn't even be into politics and socialism if it wasn't for Bernie Sanders, right? He was the one who showed me, oh, maybe socialism's not what I thought it was, right? And then you can go down the rabbit hole and you get to the point where you're supporting Cuba. But you got to understand the material conditions of the United States. Everybody's been indoctrinated with Red Scare propaganda. The word communism is like the scariest word in the world. There's all this red baiting that they can do. So those are the conditions. So how do you deal with that? And of course, Bernie made mistakes in how he dealt with that, but ultimately he's done more to spread socialism and popularize socialism in America and among the working class, and push for class struggle and worker ownership and unionization, all the things that socialists were supposed to support. He's done more than any socialist in the last 60 years, maybe there's more. I guess there's like you got to go after all the Black Panthers, right? After the CIA and the Chicago police basically decimated all the Black Panthers and all the socialist movements by killing them and throwing them in jail. Since then, Bernie is one of the best we have. Yeah, so I'm not going to bash him. I'm going to learn from him. My buddy Matt wants to run for office here soon, and we're going to do the same thing Bernie did. You know, we're going to go to workers' doors. We're going to go to the unions. We're going to say, what do you need? We're going to go to farms, you know, and we're going to say, what do you need? What are the number one things that are affecting your life? And then we're going to base our campaign off that. You know, we're not going to base it off what we want as socialist, you know, college grads, because that might not be what the working class wants and needs. You know, we want to speak to their needs, especially in Iowa, which is a right to work state. So where the state busts up unions, and yeah, the state of our unions is really poor. So that'll be something we run on for sure. And that's something that I learned from Mr. Sanders. So yeah, this has been the book review of Bernie Sanders, Outsider in the White House. This is why Bernie's a millionaire, because people like me bought this book, by the way, which was like the main talking point used against him in 2020, was that he has $1 million. He made it from selling this book. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps. Sorry about it, Republicans. All right, there's me. There's my take on Bernie. Yeah, subscribe, follow the Patreon, check out the website, check out all our socials. All those links will be in the description. Like, comment, subscribe, or don't. Doesn't matter. Just have a good day. All right, peace.